Hello everyone, it's part 6 of our impromptu history of superhero movies, and I'm Captain Logan. Joining me as always is Austin the Day Ghost. And
aloha.
Hi there. Welcome, folks. If you're watching live, appreciate you watching this after the fact as well. We've been doing these for a few months now, and we've managed to very lickety-split get all the way to the early 2010s. And the last couple episodes, we've really slowed. I'm being facetious. The last couple episodes, we've slowed down quite a bit. We got past 2008 last time and covered about 4 years. And Austin and I keep joking that we're not going to make it past 2012 this time.
Well, I think it was 2008. I almost said 2008. It was 2008. Not last time, but the time before. And I think last time was 09 through 10.
I thought we got a little bit farther than that, but if we didn't even get into 11, I'm going to segue us really nicely.
Oh, sorry. 9 through 11, yeah.
That's right. What I was, yeah, I thought we got pretty much right up to Avengers.
Yeah, no, we're good.
I think Dark Knight Rises.
Talked about First Class last time.
We talked a lot. Weirdly, we talked a lot about the X-Men franchise, because we talked about Origins some too.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's 09.
Yep. But I'm just saying, not just First Class. We were talking quite a bit about that franchise and
one that matters, though.
How it went south and came back oddly within a couple of year period, and how impressive that was. We also did a lot of kind of broad strokes throughout the years, because I opened with that question about whether you agreed that we were kind of changing things every 4 years or so. And we spent a lot of time on that idea. So anyway, let's go ahead and go back to 2011, getting into 12. I'm going to go ahead and start the clock, Austin. And folks, as always, if you're watching live, leave questions and comments as we go along. Help direct the conversation. We sure appreciate it. And if we get any factoids wrong, dates wrong, correct us, help us out with that, because we're doing this all completely off the tops of our heads and doing the history of superhero movies through a very relaxed conversation. And Austin, I've been enjoying the heck out of this, and I really appreciate you sticking around with me and going through the gauntlet of the decades now, decades and decades upon decades of superhero movies.
And it'll never stop.
Yeah, this is going to be a several year series now. When we started, I said maybe it'll take 7 videos, and there's no way we finish by next video.
No, there's a YouTube documentary series on Christian that's like 78 parts long now. Each part's an hour. That is going to be our future on superhero movies.
But that's probably scripted.
Yes, that is true.
I could have made that. Well, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say, if I'd been scripting this, it would have been more condensed, but this is me we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So that's probably not true. Austin, are you ready? I'm going to start the clock here.
I am good.
I'm going to open this one with another question. Tell me what you think about this, Austin. I want to say we talked a little bit about last time about the prospect of, what history would have looked like if Green Lantern hadn't worked out the way it did. I think we talked a little bit about Green Lantern, but I wanted to open this with that pointed question. Do you think there would have been any chance that DC could have had DC and Warner Brothers, a successful shared universe, if they had stuck to their guns and continued in that world even after the failure of Green Lantern?
Because it all depends on what comes after. My gut reaction is no. But it all depends on what happens after Green Lantern.
I can't help but wonder, given the way the DCEU ultimately worked out. And of course, Man of Steel was a much more successful movie, but it was still polarizing, at least critically.
Yeah,
I mean, we started a shared universe with a movie that had like, a 50% appreciation rate, right? Like, I don't remember what the actual Rotten Tomato score was with that, but it felt 50-50. It felt split down the middle, where like some people were really happy with it and some people thought that it ruined, Superman, and didn't understand that idea and was trying to make Superman cool and all of that. And so like, we built a shared universe for the next decade plus. From really tumultuous start. But Green Lantern would have been more tumultuous because it made no money and had a lower score.
Well, I think I mentioned this last time too, but 2013 is the year of every movie being the worst thing ever. And every like the next movie is the worst thing, even worse than that last one.
That's right.
So that was like a lot of the discussion around Man of Steel, and there were a lot of people that liked that movie, obviously. But I remember that being like a big part of the discourse was like, oh man, now Man of Steel is the worst movie ever made.
Do you just mean in superhero movies or just in movies in general?
Just in general, because Star Trek was part of that. And I'm trying to think. There was something else big that's not coming to me. But
well, Man of Steel was the next year, but are you just suggesting that like that began a trend where every year we had this?
Star Trek 2012?
Well, Star Trek is Darkness is 2012, but you were talking about Man of Steel, which is 13.
Sorry, I thought Darkness was 2013. Okay.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Was Darkness 13? No, Darkness was 13. Yeah, that's right. But I thought you started this by saying 2012 was the start of.
No, 2013.
13. Okay. Sorry, I'm with you now.
No, 2012 was like, oh man, everything's great because everybody was loving Rises, and that didn't last long. But everybody was loving Avengers.
Yeah, it didn't feel that way for me. Like, as much as I liked Avengers, I was so disappointed with Rises that I, weirdly, and I'm not even a big Bond guy, I really needed Skyfall. Like,
everybody was loving Skyfall.
Skyfall really made a difference for my getting over that slump I had that summer.
Amazing Spider-Man is that divisive one, but it's not like leaning toward, or it wasn't leaning towards this is the worst thing ever like Man of Steel was. It was just like, I liked the Raimi movies more. This wasn't very good.
Oh yeah, that was that year too. Yeah, see, that was overall a pretty disappointing summer for me, even though Avengers
2012
was quite good. Yeah, 13 felt like it was kind of bringing it back because. And I know this isn't superhero, but you mentioned Darkness. Like, I liked that first time around, and then was terrified to see it again because I knew it was bad, or I knew it was probably bad, but I was blinded by it because it was Star Trek. I don't have that anymore with
that is
with
a
Star
funny
Trek
spoiler
things, by the way.
To go back to.
Well, Man of Steel is exactly the same way. Like, we loved things I don't like anymore that year. There was a lot of that.
I mean, when that's all you're getting.
I gotta say, it is extremely surreal doing the series, Austin, now that we're to those years that are still in some of the stuff pretty fresh in my mind. That doesn't feel that long ago that we actually reviewed and were in the trenches with, because like it's history now, but it feels like last Thursday, some of it to me.
No, and we're into my second year of high school, and
oh my god, he's so young.
And I will never forget the like, oh man, Avengers is so good. Oh my god, wow, Wolverine and Spider-Man are gonna be in the next one, which isn't something I was saying, but everyone else in my school was saying.
But the Spider-Man thing wasn't super far-fetched because they were already at that point trying to figure out how to get Spider-Man in those movies. Because was Avengers the movie that was supposed to have an Oscorp tower, or was that?
Yes.
I thought it was Avengers.
But I will say, I think it was far more far-fetched back then because the Sony leaks didn't happen, and a lot of that information comes out in the Sony leaks, which is, I think, 2014, maybe, or maybe. God,
has it been that long now? That's crazy.
Yeah,
this is all very surreal.
It's all around the interview movie, which is like god awful. It was not worth the fuss.
Yeah, I remember that whole thing. I almost brought that up last time for some reason.
Oh, okay.
I just remember that coming to me when that happened. Nicholas Bodo, hey Cap, growing up means The Dark Knight Rises has more holes than a hole of cheese. A hole of cheese? Or do you mean a block of cheese? I had that when it came out. And not to keep harping on this, but like that's also super surreal that movie is 11 years old. Because
we've had 2 Batman reboots since it.
I know, isn't that wild? And I continue to try to figure out how in the world that movie was as much of a mess as it was. And it becomes more of a mess the more I look at it. We just did a watch party with the Rewind Discord with that. And man, there was a guy in that Discord that made that movie even worse for me, if that's possible. Who just kept bringing up holes and issues that I hadn't even thought of. And I've spent a lot of time talking about that movie.
No, I think you and I like both had the worst experience you've ever had with that movie.
Oh, it was painful.
Which wasn't even necessarily because like I was bringing up stuff. It was just, man, that movie's boring. The movie's a hard watch.
So yeah, it is pretty ironic, right, that in 08, and I'll touch on this because I kind of made this point last time, but it's just to get us into 2012 and beyond. It's kind of ironic that 2008 changes things, as we always talk about, bringing us Begins and Iron Man, and giving people a different feel for how sophisticated superhero movies could be for general audiences moving forward. And then in 2012, you have 2 even bigger successes with Avengers and Dark Knight Rises, and then looking back on it now, it feels like one of these things was a massive, at least, story failure, and one of them was continuing to move Avengers in the right direction. And I think whether you like Rises or not, and no matter how much money that movie made, that ended up really being the nail in the coffin for DC for a long time, really up until now, because they didn't, in my mind, like reboot's not the right word, but like properly build a shared universe apart enough from the success of that movie. They were clinging to that too hard. I mean, in some ways, it's almost a Spider-Man situation. Like, I never really thought of this as a reboot, but it is in the sense that DC had this cash cow with the Nolan Batman movies, but they couldn't pump them out. They couldn't get them out all the time like they want to, because Nolan was like a filmmaker who wanted to take his time actually making his movies, right? And they didn't spin him off into a bunch of other things like they would have loved to have done to keep the money rolling in. So what do? Rush a thing out the very next year, and with too much of the old guard from that other franchise. Like Spider-Man with Raimi to Amazing, it kind of feels like I just had this thought, like a reboot too soon. You know, I wonder if the shared universe thing would have worked better if they'd waited 3 or 4 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting because obviously that's what we're about to do, but like, because I agree with you that we jumped into that way too quick.
But I didn't think of it as too quick then because it wasn't the same franchise.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. But neither of us have really said that about, what we're doing now. And I wonder if that's just because the body's been in a grave for so long and like the corpse has been moving. But it's like this has been dead to me for so long anyways.
It's different when it has no direction and nobody cares anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that also might be a reason to wait. No, you're right. We have not been saying that because, well, because the both of us like Gunn as a storyteller and think that he might be the right guy for this job. So we have that bias. Some people don't have that bias. Some people don't like Gunn that much and don't think that he's the right guy to steer the ship. And history later on will tell the tale with that. Yeah, like you and I can be totally off.
78 of the series, we might be talking about how it was too soon.
Yeah, like you and I we can have our opinions. We can be excited about that. And you're more excited than I am because I'm not excited as much as you are about the slate they announced. But we could totally be off base. We could be totally wrong about it. Mm-hmm. There's no telling. Mm-hmm. But you're absolutely right that is not a tune we've been singing lately, and that could absolutely change. That like the fact that people, and also even if it's great, is there we're getting ahead of ourselves now, of course, but isn't there the possibility that the fact that people don't care right now is exactly the reason you should put it off a while?
Mm-hmm. Or is it, a case where nobody cares right now anyways? So if you come back with something that people will care, it'll spark that interest while it's still there. Who
It
knows?
worked for the Batman, and that's the same
We'll
studio.
see. Yeah, we're gonna have to see.
Yep.
But anyways, 2012.
But going back to 12 now, yeah. Go ahead.
Summer of Avengers.
That's obviously the
May, so it's a little bit before the summer, but yeah.
Yeah, but it was in the theater for a long time.
And it was a movie I
broke
was
records.
adamant that I would not go and see. I was
really? Why is that?
Because I only watched the first two Iron Man movies and Incredible Hulk, and I was like, I don't care about Thor, I don't care about Captain America. And now we have a big team-up movie where I don't care about half the characters. I like Iron Man, and that's about it. Like, I'm not going to see that movie just for Iron Man. I don't care. And my uncle was like, nah, it's Avengers. Like, come on, we're going to go see this movie. And he took me, and because I walked in very adamant that I did not care, I really enjoyed it. I still remember being like gobsmacked at the fact that I was seeing the helicarrier on screen for the first time, which was something I just assumed we would never have ever.
Yeah.
Like, I remember
I had the same thing with that. Absolutely. And it looked good.
Because I remember playing the games, the first Iron Man, or the first two movie games for Iron Man and the Hulk game. And Fraction wrote the second game, if I remember right. And the helicarrier is a big part of that game. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, they did that because, like, I'll never see it in the movie, but it's cool that it's in this, like, tie-in game. And then, 2 years later, we actually got it.
Well, and I remember thinking it was kind of surprising just how mixed up and everything S.H.I.E.L.D. was. And it's interesting looking back. I mean, it goes without saying, but all of this is, in some ways it feels like last Thursday, like I said. In other ways, it feels like a very, very different time. Like, how odd is it that from the beginning with Iron Man, we're building S.H.I.E.L.D. As kind of the thing to tie everything together with both Fury and Coulson, really. And then very soon after that, we, for a great plot point in a movie that helped make that movie Winter Soldier wonderful, but then kind of ruined everything after it in certain ways, we get rid of S.H.I.E.L.D. very quick. And it was like the glue that was tying it all together.
Yeah, I've always thought that we got rid of them too early, but it really works for that movie.
It's wonderful for that movie, but the craziest thing at the time, and obviously now it's whatever because we don't even think of the show as canon anymore, but how bizarre was it that you do Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and in the middle of your first season there is no more S.H.I.E.L.D.? And then it continues for 6 more years?
Yeah, no, exactly.
So that whole thing was nuts. Like I said, product of a different time. And another thing that makes it feel like such a product of a different time is this is how novel... Well, 2 things. This is how a novel the concept of bringing all these characters together in one movie was, and B, how successful each of those individual movies luckily were, that you could sell a movie that was that popular that brought so many butts and seats and made it feel like the superhero movies now could make insane amounts of money, like more than just Batman. Because this was the first thing that did anything like the numbers that Nolan Batman had done, right, with Avengers. And
Avengers and Rise both made $1 billion that summer.
Yeah, and now we think of $1 billion as just kind of the expected benchmark for a major tentpole superhero movie, or at least close. You gotta get to 850 or 9. And back then, it was unheard of. It was insane that happened. It was exactly like in 2002 when Spider-Man made 119 million opening weekend or whatever. Nobody had ever seen that before, and now that's not a huge number for a Spider-Man movie anyway. And of course, there's inflation and things to take into consideration, but anyway, we all know why those things changed. But what I was going to say, Austin, is it's shocking now, looking back at it, that you could do those kind of numbers and not have a villain that a lot of people were particularly excited about yet.
Well, I mean, it's interesting.
Like, I know Loki ended up being kind of a phenomenon, but I don't feel like he was the big selling point for that movie.
No, he was a phenomenon after that movie came out, but also people loved Iron Man, and people were kind of lukewarm about the other first movies. Like I know a lot of people, especially in our community, love the first Avenger, Captain America movie, but I think general audiences were like, yeah, like this is fine. People were joking even then that Captain America was, no one's favorite of like the main uh, Avengers. Like obviously, Hawkeye has that of just all the Avengers, but I'm talking about like that kind of main trinity.
Well, that's why
Uh,
it turns out that it was smart to get them all in a movie together as quickly as they did, because those are characters that even in comics, for most people, are an ensemble cast that work great together, but a lot of people don't care about them on their own. So it was maybe a bit of a risk to give Thor his own movie first, give Captain America his own movie first, and obviously to start with Iron Man.
Yeah, because I don't think people in general really care about Captain America until Winter Soldier and Thor with Ragnarok.
I didn't really, but I latched onto him in Avengers, and like I like First Avenger of course, like a lot of people do, but it certainly wasn't my favorite. Even at the time, and we've talked about the week ending with that and everything,
Yeah.
but I appreciated the trappings and the tone and like the overall approach more than I appreciated anything else about that movie.
No, absolutely.
I just thought it was cool that they did a period piece with it in the first place, and that they were doing some nice world building. Like going back to the 40s in your fourth movie, I like did a lot to develop the history of that world, I thought.
Well, it was a big fight. I know. That's part of that new. It was like Rise and Fall. I don't know. I think it's just Rise of the MCU or whatever.
It would probably help this series a lot if we finally sat down and read them, or at
But
least
I've
looked
heard
at the.
that's
I haven't
like
looked
a
at all the
big
bullet
thing.
points yet. I need to do that.
Is fighting to get a World War II Captain America movie. Which I mean makes sense, I guess, but that's also the obvious place to go with it. If you're
Yeah,
gonna do a shared universe.
they dodged a bullet in
Mhm.
in making sure and actually doing that.
Could you imagine if they did the '90s Captain America thing again, where he's in World War II for all of like 8 seconds?
Yeah, that would have been a mistake.
hmm
No,
yeah,
it worked in a way Captain Marvel didn't, right? Where you do, because I think Captain Marvel was trying to recreate that, where you do the period piece to establish that character, and then you put her in a team movie. And on paper, it's not a bad idea to try to recreate that. They just didn't do a great job with it.
Yeah, no, I've never really thought about that, but it is, I guess, weird that they maybe didn't try to recreate the like bookend, where you have like modern day at the beginning and end with that. So you have at least some idea of what she's doing now.
Well, and the prequelitis in that movie didn't help, because like what adds insult to injury is they almost come out and scream that they're repeating themselves with it in paving over stuff and say, "Oh no, she was actually the first Avenger."
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
That was nonsense. That was a mistake. Remix 36720 in the comments there. Hi there, thanks for the comment. If you don't have time to read the MCU book, the author Joanna Robinson has appeared on a bunch of podcasts recently summarizing the high points. So that would be a way to at least get some of that.
Stuff.
I didn't realize that. So I should listen to those, because I've seen lists of them, but I haven't read through all of that. But I'm sure more of it will stick with me if I listen to her talk about it.
No, definitely. But yeah, Avengers sets everything and also sets up the stage to ruin everything.
Okay, in what way? Go ahead.
Because it sets up the tone of all the stuff that we don't like now, where like it's this big team movie where everyone is just snarky comedy machine, and we like undercut things.
And it was super popular, so they went, that's the formula now. We have to keep
That's
recreating
the
that.
formula now.
And
exactly.
it works in that movie, in my opinion, but you have to keep it in check moving forward. And that was the big mistake. The thing is, and I've talked about this before, and I've kind of said I told you so, not you, Austin, but just in general, on this before, but I made a video back when he was announced saying, I don't know if Whedon is the right guy for this. And as much as I like that movie, he has a very specific tone And I know part of the reason you don't care for Whedon is because his characters kind of all sound the same. He does have that issue, and if you make that your foundation, your gold standard, you say everybody needs to write like Whedon, you're kind of digging your own grave, because you're creating basically a house style now. And I personally still like Whedon's writing most of the time, more or less, but I don't want, just like with Gunn, I don't want people coming in trying to ape him.
Well, and more so too, you're setting up a house style, and you're setting up a TV house style, which is not exactly what you want for your big cinematic thing. And
no, and on paper, I get why they went to him, because he's good at ensemble casts, and he's good at juggling a lot of balls where you have like a lot of subplots in a story like that. But he's a TV guy. He had made one movie based on a TV show that still kind of looks like a TV show. I mean, like, Serenity is great. I mean, I love that movie, but it's cinematic enough, but you can tell it comes from a TV place, and it's not just the budget. I mean, he does what he does well, and I would have liked to have seen him
look like TV movies.
I think if he had done 4 or 5 other movie projects and gotten away from TV, he might have been more qualified to make that movie.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, no, both of his Avengers movies look like they're made for TV. They're not cinematic at all. I've actually gotten into fights with people where, and I like the first Avengers movie. Like, this is not me being like, screw that movie's trash. I like that movie. I also just understand its place, if that makes sense. Where it's like,
sure,
I think that movie is a very good gimmick movie, and that you're entirely there to see these characters come together, and that works, and you enjoy seeing them. And it kind of lives and dies on that. If you don't care about that, you're not going to care about that movie. But if you
totally agree with that.
But if you enjoy those characters, like, I remember in high school, I'm like right in the heart of it. I'm like, Avengers is awesome. Whedon's the king of geeks, as everyone was saying after that movie came out. And my drama teacher was like, I just saw that Avengers movie this weekend. That movie's trash. It's literally just a remake of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And I was like, what?
because you had an investment, you had an in.
Exactly. And if I remove that, and I can understand where she's coming from, even though that's like inherently a worse movie, but I can put myself in that mindset where I can understand where she's coming from as somebody that's not in the inn.
No, I remember being baffled by people that were saying that the MCU, even before Phase 3 came out, was just popcorn movies that weren't about anything, and that it was a problem that was becoming, kind of the standard for blockbusters and maybe movies in general, and that they were, kind of kiddie fare that were put on a pedestal. And like, I didn't understand that, because I was invested and I was seeing some interesting characterization and thematic stuff, and I think all of that is still there, but I can see how you wouldn't care or not notice it, and that it's done better in, smarter and more sophisticated films.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a novelty at the time for your superhero movies to be about anything.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a perspective issue there. And a lot of that stuff felt really timely. Like, this was a thing that I wanted to make sure and talk about getting into this period, Austin, is why, beyond just the approach Marvel took was novel and exciting for people, is there a grander reason at all that superhero movies get as popular as they do then, like, societally, like it's like culturally, right? Like, how did any of it have to do, because you talk a lot about, and you're absolutely right about it, about how important the post 9/11 thing is in like the mid to late 2000s, like how post 9/11 Dark Knight and Iron Man both are. How important is the recession to the popularity of superhero movies? Like, does that help?
I've never had put any thought into that. That's interesting.
I had this thought today. Is this a period of time, or is it just like lightning strikes and then this maybe helps bump it up a little bit, where I like people are having a hard time making ends meet, and they feel like the world is falling apart around them, but but it's nice to have both, heroes, of course, and just kind of fun, laid-back movies to go to again. Like there wasn't enough family fare for people.
Well, I think too, like even when you go back to those Phase 1 movies, they have like a darker aesthetic to them, and then you get to Avengers, and it's like it's popcorn fun. It's getting away from that kind of post Nolan period we were kind of in after The Dark Knight.
But both Iron Man and Dark Knight do a really good job of splitting in the middle with that, where there's a lot, and we talked about this with that show that we did almost exclusively on Iron Man, but with those, there's a lot of fun to be had in those movies, even though there's also a lot of timely discussion about terrorism, and then once you get into Dark Knight Rises, you get into the 1% versus the 99 and all of that. Like, there's a lot of, timely social commentary happening in these movies, but there's also some laid back fun in some of them too. And so I think that balance is really important.
Mm-hmm. No, and I mean, I think each Phase 1 movie is more so about things than maybe the first Avengers is, where it's very easy to just watch that, and it's the Avengers team up, Loki comes down, he brings his alien army, and then they fight it. Like, it's there's very like TV episode log line you can put there, and you get like the big hour-long alien fight at the end, and it's very enjoyable. It's very like I said, it's TV, but it's colorful. Like, it's not dour in any way. The characters are all light and fun. Like, they're taking it seriously, but they're also not weighed down by the situation they're in.
But I think the first Iron Man has exactly the same thing, and the part that you ignore...
It is, but it goes darker.
But the part that you ignore in your log line, and you're absolutely right, like, you can distill it down to that, but is the underlying question of authority that movie is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because...
Yeah, but I don't think they go really deep with any of that, though. Like, there is an element of that, but I don't
It's easy for a general audience to not pay attention to that stuff, but that is the central conflict between Iron Man and Captain America. They have a whole, almost like coming to blows argument about that. It would be disingenuous to act like that's not a focal point of that movie. But it's easy for people that just want to come in and watch superheroes fight and then get along, you know what I mean, to go watch. I think it's splitting that middle also.
When you have that very like Stan Lee thing of they all get along, but they're all just kind of ribbing each other.
Yeah.
Like, it's the first time. No, I guess because we do that with like FF, but that movie sucks. But it's like the first time we're really seeing what Stan Lee brought to the Fantastic Four in comics done well for a team movie. Yeah.
Besides the obligatory superheroes have to fight for not a good enough reason, which I've always complained about with that movie.
That's very Stan Lee in that way too.
That's true, but I think we should have been better than that by that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I mean, that's also part of the fun. Like, when you want to bring these characters in, you also want to see them maybe come to blows a little bit.
That's true, but we could contrive it better. Like, that Captain America Iron Man fight is kind of nonsense.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's kind of just that movie. Like, that movie could be it could be put together better. It's put together well, and I think...
Or, I'm sorry, the Thor fight.
Yeah, I knew what you were talking about.
But like... The whole thing with Iron Man and Captain America always really stuck with me, where you've got the naive guy from the 40s that trusts his government and like can't even imagine a world where the central conflict of the movie with an alien invasion is caused in the first place by said government.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a thematic crux, especially getting into Winter Soldier and beyond, when you get into the kind of debate about security versus freedom. That it really establishes the main the kind of core social commentary that goes through those movies.
Mhm.
Kind of starts right there.
Mhm. No, I think that movie, it kind of sets up that it crawls with that so that Winter Soldier can pick up that baton and run with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, I don't think that's a giant part of that movie, but it's obviously there. Um, well, I would say the majority of it is what audiences latched on, which is just the kind of fun team up.
Yeah, I'm with you, but I also think that Iron Man again did the same thing, where like yeah, maybe tonally it feels darker in places, but the the social commentary stuff in that movie is not what audiences were mostly latching onto. Like they were latching onto the same popcorn stuff they were with Avengers. They just had more characters in Avengers to deal with.
But Iron Man's also more character focused than Avengers is too.
Yeah,
It-
no, absolutely.
which is just the MCU in general. Like you have your kind of solo movies where you get to kind of take a deeper dive into these characters, and then your Avengers movies are kind of just the big action movies where everybody comes together and they punch things.
Yeah. Do you think that approach was incorrect?
It is, in the sense that we immediately moved away from making actual Avengers movies.
Yeah.
In that your third and fourth movie just become event movies, and that's what they're going to be henceforth. And then I just don't like Age of Ultron. So
Yeah, it's that formula problem.
absolutely.
Because obviously, commercially, at least up to a point, it was the right move because it was working. But the question is, how sustainable is it?
Yeah,
I
mean,
mean,
it did really well for them.
It has been because we haven't really had another event movie like that yet since Endgame.
But I also think they put like a shelf life, I guess you could say, on the Avengers movies themselves, in that I've seen more and more people talk about the Avengers movies like No Way Home, where like it was really great in the theater, but then watching it at home, it was like the time's kind of passed. Like I've had the event, and
Yeah.
I can't enjoy it as much as I did seeing it the first time in the theater.
Okay, that's really interesting. So if they don't hold up on repeat viewings, if those aren't the movies that 20, 30, 40 years people are still really going back and looking at, then in order to keep people engaged and keep them successful, you have to have a new novelty every time that where people feel like it's a roller coaster ride they've never been on before. And with the exception of maybe Ultron, they did that with all the Avengers movies. And Ultron was the weakest performing of them. And was the weakest critical response, I think, of them. Like it didn't really have that extra gimmick besides, I mean, just, we're doing a sequel, we get to see these people come together again, and we're adding a couple of people to the team. But like that was kind of it, right? Like
what's frustrating is
when you get into, and I think of Civil War as almost another Avengers movie, so I will tack this in there just to say that's a big event where you get to see all the superheroes fight, right? And you have so many superhero characters all together. I wasn't going to tack that in, and then I thought about it, and I was like, no, that one kind of matters.
No,
but
for
then
that gimmick thing, you do have to put Civil War in.
You have to put that in there. But then, with the other Avengers movies, Infinity War gives you the same gimmick you had with Avengers, but just bigger, where you've got so many more characters that are all coming together, some of which aren't even Avengers in the first place, but are working with them. And then
and more characters that people latched onto as well, where it's like you almost have like a second wave of what the first movie was doing.
And then you have the kind of, serialized thing of there's a giant cliffhanger. It's not done yet. We blew everybody's minds with this horrible downer ending. And how can we possibly come back from that? So all of that is a new novelty, is kind of a gimmick. But yeah, I think you touched upon something really, really important there.
One, because you were talking about Age of Ultron being the weakest, and it didn't really have anything to add to that gimmick. That is the biggest stumble, in that could have been what knocked us out of it just being the gimmick movies. In that the gimmick is that it's Avengers, but there's like a story this time, and like I mean,
Yeah.
like a deeper story, and like we go more into the characters, and we do something cool. And then that movie's too short, and it's a giant mess, and
And I
they
like that
don't do
movie more
enough
than
of
you do,
that.
but I agree with all of that.
hmm And then it also has to be a giant advertisement for what they're doing. Like there's just it's being pulled in so many different directions, and then there's not it like it's harder to latch onto. But it's also trying to be the Avengers, but a little bit deeper this time, and it just doesn't work. And if it had worked, if you'd done that and it paid off, you would have immediately pulled Avengers out of being the okay. These are the big like event gimmick movies.
Yeah.
These are just big movies where we can tell real stories with this team. And I don't know if we would have the event thing in the same way that we do with like Infinity War, Endgame, and Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars in the future, if that had paid off.
No, that's a really good point. It feels like, especially how quickly that movie comes out, because that's 14, is it not?
15.
Or is that okay? So it's 3 years after.
Mm-hmm.
But I still say, especially because they were building and this is not the wrong move, but they were building such a big status quo around the Avengers, where they were trying to treat it like comics, where we have these singular adventures with solo superhero characters, but then the Avengers is an institution, and they work in a building, and they go out and they solve bigger issues, and
The MCU Fantastic Four.
yeah, and I. And not that far removed from what they were in the comics either, except you don't get the sense that they've really done that much. And I get the sense that they wanted to have like 6 or 7 or 10 of those with the same team or most of the same characters, and it didn't work out that way. So they just made them event movies. Like you're right. I think Ultron. I think Ultron is so important, and I never really thought about that before in the overall direction the MCU ended up going.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. No, and I mean, there's things that I don't mind in the first movie that Whedon does again in the second movie that I think don't work at all. You have things like I always say Whedon can't write villains, and in the first Avengers movie, he gets taken out basically as a joke, Loki. And then we do the same thing with Ultron, but it worked with Loki because it's Loki and it kind of fits that character. It does not fit Ultron. That is not the thing you do with that.
No, I don't think so either. And he's got a long history of making his villains, arguably too comedic, or he goes to that well a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I think the villain in Serenity is really good, but that's few and far between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair enough. But no, when you have that scene where Hulk like bursts into the plane and Ultron's like, "Ah, come on!" and then he gets thrown out of the plane, like, what are you doing?
Yeah, well, he comes off, real menacing initially.
Well, that's how they sold him.
Yeah.
That's another big issue with that movie is they sold Ultron as the scariest thing ever, and you walk in and he's like evil Tony Stark, and he's like just being Joss Whedon snarky the entire movie. And
the evil Tony Stark thing is a good idea.
It is great, but the writing's not there.
Yeah, and I still like it a touch better than you do, but there's huge execution problems with it. Absolutely. Smarty Pants tutoring. Movies aren't like comics. Even comics should try to stay away from having a big event more than once a decade. It's hard to recreate that lightning in a bottle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think a decade is excessive, and it kind of depends on what you mean by event, but the like twice, 3 times a year thing we have in comics now that we've had for a long time, where you have to have like everybody come together for a huge event, doesn't work because they're not special, and because they always either don't change anything in status quo enough, or the changes are so forced that it's not interesting reading anything after it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And arguably, maybe you have that with these movies now too.
No, it's interesting. The MCU has taken a lot of things that we really like about comic book storytelling and a lot of things we don't. And
Yeah.
brought them to the mainstream, and it's interesting to see how just general audiences react to some of this stuff.
What's frustrating is, and it's also interesting because general audiences don't understand those things. And not to be like condescending or look down on people that don't know things that I know, but it's just kind of interesting, right? Being in kind of a different culture with that, because I've been into comics for a long time. I see where some of the strengths and weaknesses initially come from, like the things we learned and the things we didn't learn from comics. And you'd think we had decades and decades of comic history to learn from, and look at all the things we didn't learn that we took to screen. And you look at general audiences that don't understand where those things come from, and it's kind of interesting to see the reactions.
Yeah, absolutely. We're even getting into that just like insanely convoluted place.
Yeah, where you start to feel like you need a crisis of some kind.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you just don't even buy the continuity. There's either so many mistakes, or just in general, you have too many projects that don't feel like they're in the same world. So getting from
should we move to Spider-Man Arises?
Well, we can talk about those things too. I was going to kind of move ahead even a little bit further than that, but we can totally piggyback and jump onto that stuff. But given that the very next year is Man of Steel, and we have DC trying to go up against Marvel with their own shared universe, I wanted to ask you how you felt about, forgetting the quality of Man of Steel, their initial approach and then the very next choice they made. Like, if you're DC, how do you handle that rivalry, or that I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. You're just going into business against a different company and trying to beat them at their own game. Like, should they have even tried that early? Should they have let DC be more splintered, or was it the right call to be like, oh, Marvel is Marvel, DC needs to be DC?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've always wanted the more separate DC of just DC's making projects, and then if they make a shared universe and it works, then that's cool. But I don't necessarily need that.
Same here.
So I would have been perfectly happy if they just went, yeah, we're DC. Like, here's a Superman movie. Here's, whatever, the next Batman. Here's Wonder Woman. And they could be connected. They could not be. It would have been fine either way. Obviously, the route we did take was a mess. And and they just handed it off to the wrong guy is the issue.
In their defense, it's such a tall order if you're going to go in direct competition with a company that already feels like it has the monopoly on something.
Well, and that's another thing
where superheroes are becoming synonymous with Marvel. And then you have, as a big popular property, Batman, and that's it. And you have all these other potential successes.
But I mean, that's DC's in, is that, Marvel came in and they were becoming synonymous with that, but they built it off of, in the general public's eyes, B tier characters, while DC, there's that kind of famous thing that people talked about before the MCU, where Marvel is X-Men and Spider-Man and DC is everything else you've ever heard of. They could have easily come in and been like, okay, the general audience isn't super familiar with Wonder Woman. They know who Wonder Woman is. Like, that is name recognition.
They've got great name recognition. A lot of people don't even know what Iron Man is at that time.
Exactly. So they could have easily come in, I think, and been like, just here's a good Wonder Woman movie. Here's a good Aquaman movie. Here's a good Flash movie.
And not only had people heard of characters like Wonder Woman and Batman and Superman, but all of those three had a long TV history. Like, they had even been in other media that were popular.
That's why they have that, yeah, is because they've been on TV for decades. So there was people who grew up with a lot of those cartoons.
And all three of them
even if it was like the Super Friends.
Yeah, but even outside of cartoons, all three of them had, importantly, successful live-action shows for adults. All three of them had that at various times in history. And Superman had a show on almost every decade.
Yeah, Yeah.
But Wonder
Well,
Woman
then,
had a popular show, and obviously Batman's was campy, but it was still aimed as much at adults as it was kids, and adults watched it.
mhm. Well, and it goes into a thing that we were saying, way at the start of this, which is that DC did such a bad job of capitalizing on what they had, where, these characters had recognition, but it took until 2017 to make a Wonder Woman movie. It took
Yeah,
until last
yeah.
year to release a Flash movie.
So
That's
so a
insane.
couple questions I want to ask you about that. Do you think that it's possible if this is where I'm trying to give them a little bit of credit with just the difficulty in going again in direct competition against Marvel? Do you think if you're DC, it is even possible to, because I love the way you put that, to just look at what you have and the potential and the accolades that are there and ignore what Marvel is doing and
Mhm.
go in competition against them by simply doing it the way you do it anyway?
Mhm.
Is that even possible?
Well, it's hard to say because we're both geeks that don't know anything about making movies, right? And it's like
Sure.
we can easily look at it and be like, look at this, all this material you have. Just make that.
Because I
Like,
don't
why
think
are
you
you
play
looking at
them.
them?
I don't think you play them at their own game. I think you play your own game, and the only thing you take from them is, oh, people care more about superhero movies now than they did before. I think they looked too hard at Marvel's brand, and we need to be the opposite of that.
Hmm.
So
And
they're
what they
like,
should have
let's
been
make
taking
really
notes.
super serious, self-serious things. It was this like mistake, this negative 1-2 punch of people looked at Nolan as really smart and sophisticated and dark and down to earth. And
Mhm.
secondly, Marvel's doing what they perceived of as the opposite of that.
And what they should have been taking note of is that, hey, Marvel is gaining a house style. Maybe we should come in and be like, hey, we're like them, but we can do anything.
Yeah,
We can make your R-rated superhero movie. We can do your super dark movie. We can do your farcical comedy movie. We can do
yeah. And
anything.
what's so sadly ironic about that is that had been their approach going all the way back.
Hmm.
But they abandoned it. So the only difference, if they, and again, you and I are both saying we didn't need this, and I don't know that they did to keep people interested, but if they felt like a shared universe is the way to go, you can still have those interconnected movies
Hmm.
and have vastly different styles and tones and make them for vastly different audiences. I still say, and I've said this forever, that that initial idea before Marvel had really gotten going on their shared universe of let's start with Justice League and then branch out, the inverse of what Avengers turned out to be, was probably the best idea they had.
Hmm. One, I think when you're
That's the
making,
way they should have been. The opposite is you start with that. Maybe make it a little bit more character driven than Avengers was. And I'm saying that retroactively because they wouldn't have had Avengers to look at that time.
Mhm. No, I mean, I think, if you're doing it super different, like I want a Batman movie and a Superman movie that look like they can't coexist, but they do, because that's
Well,
Batman and
and
Superman.
dude, that's what everybody wanted back in the '90s. Like people really thought, before Christopher Reeve's accident, that Superman and '89 Batman should be on screen together. And I look at that and I go, I don't see it. They look like vastly different universes. But in comics, they were too. Could it have worked?
One, I agree with you, but my thing with that is that Superman is too real world and Batman's too
No, I agree.
stylized. I want them both stylized, but in the opposite
Yeah,
way. Like I want
so
Batman
do
to
I.
walk.
And that's why I'm
Look,
glad that didn't happen. Yeah, because the problem is '89 is not in 1970 whatever, and Superman
New York.
is in the '70s
No, if anything,
intentionally.
obviously this wouldn't work for different reasons. But visually speaking, it would make more sense to pair Reeve with Bale
Oh,
because they both just live in
interesting.
real world cities and are very much of their time. Now it wouldn't fit because you couldn't make me buy that Christian Bale post Dark Knight would be able to fight Christopher Reeve Superman, but you know what I mean. Like
I don't
that's
need that to be a
I think
versus
that makes more
movie
sense.
either, though.
No, I know, but that's the inevitable thing you do, Cap.
But it could be like Avengers, where they fight for
That's what I
one
mean. Like even
token
if they're in a
fight.
team, that's what I mean.
Sure,
Even if it's that movie. There is that scene where they fight each other.
But I
for a
don't need
minute.
to believe Batman has any chance against Superman. I don't need
No,
that.
I don't.
And I don't think most people. And I don't think most people do.
Mm.
Maybe that's
Well,
naive, because when I was growing up, I remember all the stupid conversations people would have about who would win in a fight, and I'm like, why is this even a conversation?
Mm.
Like, I don't even care that Batman
Like
can't.
when people punch, Cap.
And then it got very popular in the 2000s to have, Batman always have some kind of a trick up his sleeve where he had fought 18 steps ahead, was playing five-dimensional chess, and was always ready to take Superman on. But, like, I don't need to see that.
And I agree.
Or you tell a really cool story where he has some great reason to have to actually do with that. I guess, but like I don't really need that. I'm jumping around, but also to your point about events, that was another big mistake, and maybe this goes without saying, that DC made in jumping the gun after Man of Steel, instead of doing a Man of Steel 2, just putting Batman in it. That it had to be a giant event. You've had one movie, and your second movie is this huge event because fans never got to see Batman and Superman in a movie before.
Mm-hmm. One, it was
and
also
it undercuts your eventual Justice League.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's also a giant mistake when you're doing that, and the guy that's making it only cares about Dark Knight Returns. So you're starting in a weird place because you're starting Dark Knight Returns.
The only way that works is if you more directly adapt that book and you don't care about in a larger continuity. Because you can make a Dark Knight Returns movie and with Superman in it, and that could be really cool. But you can't be thinking shared universe when you do that. Or you do something nuts. I've never had this thought before. And I'm not saying this is what they should have done, but I do think it could have potentially worked. You'd have to really mess around with casting. What if you work your way backwards? And
you do Dark Knight Returns, and then you go, that's in the future.
Yeah, and then you do decades earlier.
That'd be interesting.
And you recast it.
Mm-hmm.
Or you cast young, but you make them look old in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
That could have been cool, actually. I'd never had that thought before.
Possibly, who knows?
That's not what I would have done, but then what they did... The thing is, I can't come up with anything more counterintuitive than what they made.
Well, no, and it's interesting, and it's funny that we're talking about this.
What I just said makes sense compared to what they made.
It's funny we're talking about this exact same thing, because Snyder came out today and was like, I wish Gunn the best, and the only way I would come back is to make just a straight Dark Knight Returns movie. And yeah, you should have just done that in the first place.
Damn it, why didn't you make that in the first place?
Granted, I'm sure that's just WB mucking with things.
Yeah, but you know what? That's fair. Like, give him a little bit of credit. That's probably what he pitched. He probably was like, let's just make this book, because that's what he had done before, and that those were his successes. And I've said this 100 times, but if you're going to bring Snyder on a project, you don't have him come up with stories. You just let him directly adapt somebody else's work. That's what he's good at.
Well, and Cap, what is the thing people like most about Batman versus Superman? It's Batman.
Yeah.
It's that Dark Knight Returns stuff.
No,
absolutely.
That's true, although I've never thought that really translates to looking anything like Dark Knight Returns Batman brought to screen. I think it's just a good performance with a weird script is all. Like, they cast that right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they did. And then the outfit looks like that movie for no good reason.
Well, he loves it so much, but then he also gets that famous cover wrong, the lightning shot, because he's flipped around the wrong way.
I never even thought about that. So
it's like his back, but he's forward in the cover. But...
So if you're making a shared universe for DC, sorry, I'm fixated on this now. I've heard a lot of fans say this, and I agree with it. The blueprint is DCAU. Obviously. Like, you already have a really successful shared universe for DC on the small screen, and it's not really hard to look at that material and figure out how to kind of translate it. It doesn't have to be exactly what Bruce Timm did. It doesn't even totally have to be like that. But what I mean is, he did exactly what you're talking about, where he's got a Batman and a Superman that kind of don't even look like they're in the same universe, and then he merged them believably. And then he just kept building out from there, where
Well, I would
eventually
say
you've got Justice League shows with a giant cast of characters, and he just naturally let it develop. And the problem is, Marvel was getting so popular so quickly that DC felt like they needed a Justice League in like X number of years.
mhm,
But I still say if you start with Justice League and work your way backwards, you could still do it.
mhm. No, absolutely. No, and I think, Batman, Superman, Justice League all have their own visual style. Obviously, Justice League's closer to Superman, but it's not exactly that.
Yeah.
Like they made something that fits what they were making.
So
That's all you have to do.
So you said it's preposterous that they've got these huge characters there that they've never made movies about, like Flash. If you're them and you don't start with Justice League, do you do Superman? Because they were right to start with Superman, and that's why Gunn's doing it again.
Mhm.
Do
That's the right place.
do you start with Superman and then make a Wonder Woman and then make a Batman? Like, is that what you do?
Probably. It's hard to say because obviously you don't want them to do exactly what Marvel did. But
Yeah.
I would also, I was actually kind of shocked it wasn't in the initial slate, but I think Teen Titans should be one of the first things you make because that's a giant show that people care about, and
Wow.
there's an audience for it.
Yeah.
Like, you make a Teen Titans movie, people will watch it.
Well, and that's been proven by what looked to me like a god-awful TV series that got 5 seasons and people watched and liked.
I have never met a single person over 5 that likes Teen Titans Go, and it's lasted like 10 seasons.
Yeah. No, that's this weirdly super popular and yet underappreciated property. I'll never understand how that goes together. But Teen Titans is one of those things that outside of our circles, nobody talks about, but it has tons of material.
No, Teen Titans is, I think, pretty big. Like, a lot of people like that material.
Nicholas Bodo
right there.
says, I wish the Batman was the actual first DCU film. I can totally see why some people would have that opinion. I really appreciate separating it and having two different Batman properties. I think it's so cool that we're finally going to be allowed to have that.
Yeah, I could have been happy either way. Because I feel like a hypocrite to say that, because I was very much like, never mess with the Batman, never include it with your shared universe DC stuff.
But you also said blending two that don't look like they go together is cool.
Well, and now that I have more faith that the actual DC universe stuff might be good, I could go, okay, like maybe that would be cool. But I'm also ultimately happy it's staying on its own. And I think DC are in a really good place where in like 2 years they could have both a better version of the MCU and a better version of Sony's stupid universe. And except Batman can actually show up.
It's also really sad, and just a giant missed opportunity in my mind, that DC couldn't get ahead of Marvel on the multiverse thing, which could have both helped them and also saved Marvel. You ever had that thought? Because multiverse is a big DC thing before it's a Marvel thing, and Marvel ultimately embraced it and started doing the Earth numbers and all of that. But it's more, traditionally, it's more of a DC idea than a Marvel idea because of crises and all of that. And that goes all the way back. Like, it's not just the 80s crisis. We had imaginary stories and alternate universe stories going all the way back with DC, and Marvel had What If, but it was a little bit different. Like, DC was already crossing their worlds and stuff before Marvel was doing that. And so it would have just been a really natural fit for them to do those kinds of stories, and even pretty early in a shared universe. It's kind of sad they didn't get ahead of it, like the TV shows did, as bad as a lot of that ultimately was. Because if they had done that, Marvel probably wouldn't have done a multiverse saga, which has really kind of shot them in the foot.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have saved both companies. And I think you could even go this far. I think you could have started with separate movies that didn't seem to have anything to do with each other. And when they were all popular, you just used the multiverse as the gimmick to cross them. So you go, if it's, which I wouldn't have wanted to see Marvel do, but that's a very natural DC thing to do. And so I'd say, and some people won't agree with this, because I know people are sick of multiverse, and that's totally fair. But you could so have your cake and eat it too if you're DC, where you go, let's not even bother with the multiverse idea, or sorry, with the shared universe idea, unless they're popular. And then eventually we can start telling stories that cross them with the multiverse gimmick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't care about that just because I don't care about multiverse, but I think you could do exactly that and then just be like, well, they exist in the same world. It's DC. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, exactly. We are already past an hour, and we didn't get to some of the 2012 stuff you wanted to mention, but I was I don't know, I was kind of ready to move on into the mid 2010s, but we can cheat for a second if there's anything specific you wanted to bring up about Amazing Spider-Man. What was the other one?
Rises, which just we kind of talked about it in talking about DC stuff.
Yeah, we touched on that.
Mm-hmm. No, I just thought the big one was Amazing Spider-Man because it's kind of your first big reboot thing, and it's rebooting Spider-Man.
Yeah. Which honestly we've touched on quite a bit in a couple of the other chapters of this.
That is probably true.
So
but it is funny that we got.
I wasn't sure what else I had to say about that, except it was kind of a misfire, popularity wise. But there's a lot of things I appreciate about that movie as a movie. But it didn't stand the test of time for people, and the only reason anybody's going back to it now is because they did No Way Home, and all of a sudden people care about Garfield again, which I never could have predicted, because I saw the Amazing movies as that like abandoned franchise that you'll have to tell your kids about. They'll go, oh, there was this other Spider-Man thing, I didn't even know about that.
Now suddenly everybody loves both Amazing movies out of nowhere.
And you're hearing a lot of people say, Sony, you're ridiculous for still trying to build to a Sinister Six after all this time in a universe without Spider-Man, with Spider-Man characters, when now that people care about the Amazing movies again, just make Amazing Spider-Man 3, finally. Just do it now.
Well, what I wanted to happen is for them to keep doing their Sony thing, but be like, okay, this is the Amazing world, and now he's going to be in every one of these movies. But it turns out it was the re-release Morbius thing, and it was entirely just memeing them to box office failure. That's what I want to secretly happen, but
yeah. Do you think there's any real influence or takeaways, like positive or negative, that the genre really takes from Amazing Spider-Man? It's probably more what not to do, wouldn't you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it leaves a giant impact in terms of like, oh, let's take from this. But part of that is that
it's sad to say, because I like what's done with that origin quite a bit.
And I think it was dated when it came out, I think, in what it was looking at. Yeah, like we talk about that a lot.
That's a good
with
point.
The Sony movies
and with the DCEU.
One's got it too.
But also with DCEU, like past BVS, where like every single movie, maybe with some exceptions of some of the more popular ones, but like a lot of those movies come out and they feel like a product of a decade earlier.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. And then obviously you have that same DC thing where they put that out and they were like, we got lukewarm reaction. Let's just react to that for our next movie.
Yeah. Well, and Amazing 2 is a really awkward beast where it feels like too much of a pendulum swing. Where it's like, oh, people... It's sort of like if... what Snyder did with a Man of Steel 2 was like change the color palette and make it look like bright and happy.
Mm-hmm. Amazing 2 is like the cinematic equivalent of killing Rasputin. It was shot, stabbed, drowned, beat. Just everything.
And it was so baffling when it came out, but I don't think it's any weirder than some of what the DCEU has put out.
It is and it isn't.
You think so?
Yeah, I think that movie has like shades.
I guess we had already had BVS before that.
Mm-hmm. No. BVS is 2 years later.
Oh, is it? No, because it's 14, right?
Yep.
Because so yeah, I still say BVS is okay. So I'm gonna stick with my point here. BVS is still more baffling than that.
It is and it isn't. I would say BVS is more of a piece than Amazing 2 is.
Like, I don't know if I would have said that before I did a big project on it, but like having combed through that and written about every scene with BVS, that is a weirder movie to me.
I don't know. I think it's more cohesive.
Ooh, I don't agree with that.
That's fair,
But I don't want to be put in the
you're wrong.
position to have to take up for Spider-Man for Amazing 2 in cohesion. I think, as preposterous as that is, the story tracks and makes more sense, but it doesn't mean it tracks or makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be put in that position, Austin.
I will also say that Amazing 2 is a more annoying, like, look at what we're doing in the future thing than BVS is, though BVS's one is far more baffling in that it's the email thing, but it's like a scene. Amazing 2 is like every other scene is like, hey, look, it's Felicia. Hey, look, it's this thing. Look, there's Dr. Octopus's arms in the background.
Well, and it's because they're as obsessed as DC is with making the shared universe thing happen.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly.
That's the problem there. I mean, Marvel has this huge impact on those other companies, and none of them learn the right lessons.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a pretty good place to leave us here, I think.
Yeah.
Even though we had to cheat for a few minutes to get there. Mm-hmm. Next time, we'll talk about 2013. And
yeah, Iron Man 3 happened. I like it, but a lot of people don't.
No, that's true.
Thor 2 happened. Nobody liked it. Okay, next time we'll talk about 2014.
No, we can talk about that too. No, I think we'll get through at least 2014 next time. And this was more overviewy through that decade.
When we talked a lot more hypothetically,
which was fun.
Mm-hmm. We'll see.
I think it's just as interesting to talk about what could have happened as what did happen, because I feel like we're living in a weird alternate universe, and like the real regular universe is somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Because this gets so odd as it moves along. I mean, one thing I was gonna mention at the beginning when I asked you that question about Green Lantern and if a successful shared universe could have been based on that movie, is if that had happened, you wouldn't have had Deadpool.
Mm-hmm. That is true.
It's like it changes the trajectory of everything.
You know what the real like good universe is, Cap?
What's that?
Is that in that universe, instead of Avengers, the big $1 billion first Marvel movie is Rise of the Silver Surfer, and then every superhero movie after that has giant clouds.
That's a good point, because
so Green Lantern does really well.
If you had access to more Marvel characters, you could have had a shared universe in the Tim Story Fantastic Four movies, as strange as that would have been, and that almost happened with X-Men.
Well, it would be Fox releases Silver Surfer, and everyone goes, "Oh my God, this is the pinnacle of superhero movies." And then Iron Man comes out the next year and bombs because it's not Silver Surfer.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that I'm latching onto most with these as we're going along. You pull any singular thread, and just the trajectory of all of this is entirely different.
Mm. Yeah,
particularly starting in the early mid-2000s. But
it's like, what if you had interest in what ifs?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, and of course, we've gotten a ways away now from conversations about movies that almost got made. But there's a lot of that where it's like, if this movie had happened and been successful, what is the trajectory? But then there's also, if this movie that we did have, didn't happen or happened very differently, you pull that one thread and everything's totally different.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You couldn't have predicted very much of this, which I think is why I still find it such a fascinating study after all these years. Because as it's continued, it feels like we're just going farther and farther off a very strange cliff.
Yeah, and in 2 years, maybe it'll explode when it finally hits the bottom. Or maybe that's what this year is, since they like all bombed.
Yeah. Well,
And then
I've been saying this a lot on the channel lately, but like next year could be like oddly important because we're gonna have mostly rated R superhero movies, and I don't know how they're going to go, but a lot of people, like families, are gonna stay home, and they're gonna have a year without superhero movies, basically. And if good things happen after that, it could be a boon for the genre, or it could solidify people's disinterest in it when they latch on to other things, and especially if nothing great comes out in the next 3 or 4 years.
no, it could be really good if we have like nothing but R-rated superhero movies and Sony trash next year, and then immediately follow that up with Superman the year after. That could potentially be like a big boon for the genre.
Yeah. And that's why I say next year could be kind of oddly important. You know, by what's not coming out more than what is.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All I know is that I'm getting a Hellboy movie, and I'm excited. Nothing else.
I hope that's great. It'll make $5, but I hope it's great.
Yeah, but they only put $10 into the budget,
Good.
so maybe they'll make
Good.
its
Well,
money back.
see, that's the other thing that could be important about next year is if we have some more really successful, relatively cheaply made, not cheaply, but small budget, low budget movies. Hopefully, the big studios take that to heart. With both what is successful and what lately has not been. Oh, maybe the Marvels didn't need to be a $240 million movie. I couldn't begin to tell you where most of that money went. There's a lot of conspiracy theories going on right now about Disney money laundering, and I can't help but think there could be some credibility to that, because you see these really, I'm joking, but you see these really these really inflated budgets, and you go, I don't know where a lot of that movie went. Is there money laundering? I mean, you used to be able to say, well, so much of it went to Robert Downey, but he's not in these anymore.
Mm-hmm. It's going to Kevin Feige's production fees.
Exactly.
No, and then you have like Deadpool 2, sorry, 3. God, I'm erasing those movies. Deadpool 3 is going to have a giant budget, I'm sure, and that's R-rated, so, how well is that going to do?
Yeah.
But it's also Deadpool, and it's got Hugh Jackman, so like...
Yeah, I think that's probably not a crazy risk, even though it's still going to have a more inflated budget than it needs to have, because the R rating did not hurt those other Deadpool movies, and they made more than a lot of the X-Men movies did.
Mm-hmm. The difference there, though, is that the first Deadpool is like a $50 million budget.
That's true.
I will be shocked if 3 is not at least 200.
Yeah.
But I haven't looked into it, so I could be entirely off.
I think the novelty of that character coming back and it being Disney attempting a rated R movie, and Jackman being in it, and especially if it has a lot of cameos from other movies, because like people are tired of that with stuff that hasn't been good, but it could still be an exciting gimmick for this specifically. I think all of that could give it a really big opening weekend.
Mm-hmm. No, it'll be interesting to see.
And I don't know if it's going to be any good, but I'm just saying, I think it will probably perform.
Mm-hmm. No, it probably will. And I mean, Joker made $1 billion, so.
Yeah, and that sequel's next year, and that whole thing is
going
to be
make $1 billion.
That whole thing will be fascinating. See, you say that, but what if it does? Like, what if they make just the right trailer? That is going to live and die by whether the music sounds catchy. I really think that, like that being a musical, the music's gonna have to sound good.
Mm-hmm. I think just the fact that they made $1 billion, they made it a musical, is like that initial, like that will turn people off. Not like overall, but there will be enough people turned off by that as a concept that won't bring it up to $1 billion. I think, but I could be wrong. I also said Oppenheimer would bomb this year, so. Take that for what it's worth.
See, I think there's a really good chance you're right, but it's gonna live and die by a trailer.
Mhm.
If they put the right trailer out, you could be wrong about that.
Very true.
I can't predict that until I see what the advertising, because it's gonna live and die by advertising. The last one did. The last one was all about the advertising. It had a really good marketing campaign.
Well, it'll just be more shots of Joker dancing, but this time they'll
He's
be
singing this time?
over it. Yeah,
He's on that staircase again, but now there's a melody coming out of his mouth.
and he's like, "I got chills, they're multiplying."
Like, what even is the music in that movie? Like, what's the style?
I have no idea. I couldn't begin to tell you.
Well, anyway, we've talked too long already, folks. Thanks a lot for being
well, you
here.
know what it's gonna have,
Yeah.
Cap. I actually have an answer for you
He's
now.
making us continue. Yeah, what's up?
Sorry, I'm sorry. This is the last thing. It'll have a certain style of music, but not the one you think.
Okay, nobody knows why you're doing that on this show. Anyway, everybody, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for being here live and after the fact. And as always, we want to thank our patrons at every tier, but especially the $10 Superhero Rewind producers. And one of the perks that you get as a Rewind producer, quick plug for Patreon, patreon.com/geekvolution, is you get your name read very dramatically at the end of every show. And I'm going to do that for you right now, thanks to all of our patrons. I'm going to start at the bottom this time, including Thomas Edghill, Super Billy, Michael Martin, Matt Bat 68, Joe Gira, Joe Turner, Jeff Niederhofer, Hayden Spring, Goofster 123, Elliot Slater, Dr. Hello, Chewbacca's Lover, Bill Mills, and One Reply. Okay, so do you think it sounds better forward or backwards?
I have many feelings about that.
It's really about the one that it ends on. Like does it sound better to end? Well, actually, that's oh, you know what? I missed the $10 ones. I just read the 15s. So I started in the wrong place, and that's why it sounded weird. So I missed Adam March, Damon Begay, Hot Soup, Jacob Schneider, Jonathan Campbell, Kareem Roberts, Matthew Brody, Michael Austin Gulick, Miguel Rodriguez, The Day Ghost, Wendell Jones.
I was gonna say I thought it ended with Wendell Jones. I was like, I guess he left. That's sad.
Yes, I should have started with Wendell Jones. Yeah, so that's what happened there. I was just looking at the wrong tier.
Well, I can tell in the conversation of which I prefer, forward or backwards.
Yeah.
I would prefer either over what the hell that was.
Oh, so I shouldn't do a whole tier and then jump back. Yeah. Well, anyway,
now people know.
I'm just making conversation. Anyway, thanks a lot for joining us, folks, and we will see you again in a couple of weeks, probably for another one. And it'll be interesting to see how many parts this takes. We're not rushing it, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But we have many opinions. We have lots to say. Austin, I've been thoroughly enjoying this with you, man.
Mm-hmm. No, it was great. And next time, I guess we'll be talking about the crazy year of 2014.
It's wild. Yeah, I made a movie that year. Not a superhero movie, but
that's the only thing we'll be talking about.
A movie about comic shops. And yeah, it's weird thinking back on that because that was just before Guardians came out. Everybody was speculating about how that was going to do. It was just really weird, like doing a thing right before that because. I don't know, like the world changed with that movie too.
Mm-hmm. And with Winter Soldier, but not amazing too.
Well, Winter Soldier was out already when I went and made that movie, but Guardians wasn't quite yet.
Yeah, no, I just mean for that year because it's a big year.
It sure did. Anyway, we'll see you later, folks. I was Captain Logan. This was Austin, the Day Ghost.
Bye, guys.
See you later, folks.